On behalf of the GC Foster College community, I want to welcome all our past students, coaches, sports administrators, and other persons that have taken the time out to participate in this seminar online, aka webinar. I will now introduce our moderator, Mr. Lewin Williams. Mr. Lewin Williams has been employed to the college as lecturer of physical education and sport and applied science since 2015. He has served the National Standards Committee of the Ministry of Education as a writer and a trainer. On behalf of the GC Foster College community, we want to thank him and the other panelists and Mr. Radcliffe Allen, who assisted in facilitating this seminar or this webinar online. Again, I welcome you all, and I know the discussions will be energetic, educational, and entertaining. Thank you very much, and have a good evening.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Wilson. I want to thank you for joining us across Jamaica, the region, and across the world. I want to particularly welcome our students, those especially who are in the diaspora at this moment, those who are working, those who have migrated, our past students, but they are with us now online. We also want to welcome and thank our prospective students who joined us at this time, and the entire GC Foster College community. At this time, GC Foster College being a global leader in physical education and sports, and a home of world-class coaches, physical education teachers, massage therapists, and other sporting professionals. It would be remiss of us not to have a webinar of this nature given the COVID pandemic, and at a time when our country, our schools, our physical education teachers, our heads of departments, and our principals are asking questions and seeking answers and direction in terms of where they go and who they look to for practical solutions, the new norm. And as such, this webinar is timely, and we do hope to share with you this evening in a practical way to reach all our schools, all our partners. We're thinking about our high schools, we're thinking about our secondary schools and our prep and primary schools in terms of how is it we're going to approach physical education at a time like this when we are challenged. And as such, we have an esteemed panel this evening. On our panel is Mr. Michael Daly, lecturer at the college. We have Mr. Marlon Gale, lecturer at the college, and we have with us the Rose among the Thorns, Dr. Olivia Rose, sports psychologist. Our first panelist is going to be Mr. Michael Daly. He hails from rural Jamaica, St. Elizabeth, but he's not a farmer. He lectures at the college. He has his master's degree from University of Technology in association with GC Foster College. His bachelor's was done here at GC Foster, so he's an alumni, and he served in the physical education department. He enjoys a red stripe beer, and he's a Liverpool fan from back in the days of John Barnes. We now welcome Mr. Daly. He'll be speaking to us about teaching practice as it really about. He'll be speaking to us about the practical aspect of teaching and delivering the curriculum, and also the academic aspect, the online aspect of delivery at this time. We welcome Mr. Daly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lewin. Good night, members of the panel, or viewers. Thank you very much. The COVID-19 pandemic is an unprecedented time all across the world. Extensive social distancing policies are put in place restricting people's daily activities, and worldwide pleas from government asking people to stay safe and stay at home. This, of course, means that most people will spend much of their time, if not all, at home, not doing any form of physical activities. These social distancing measures mean that people have far fewer opportunities to be physically active, especially if activities such as walking or taking part in leisurely activities such as jogging, riding, or going to the gym are being restricted. Furthermore, these drastic measures also make it so much easier to be sedentary at home for long periods of time. The impact of this physical inactivity may very likely be seen in many areas, such as health and social care, and the mental well-being of people across the globe. Although these measures are important and needed in a time such as now, our bodies and minds still need physical activity, and many benefits are derived. During this pandemic, it is even more important for all of us to be physically active, even if it means taking short breaks from sitting at your desk or doing some walking or stretching. Now, as physical educators, our job is a hard one, but we have to be resilient and resourceful in ensuring that our students get the best of both worlds, staying safe and being physically educated. For our practical classes, we can do a number of things. First, I will look at our instructional space. We can mitigate the transmission of COVID-19 by utilizing a large outdoor safe space that is conducive to learning, movement, and physical distancing. So one, we take our students outside and remind students to wear appropriate clothing. Now, two, if we cannot go outside, we can utilize space that we normally would not use for physical education. But if that physical space has the capability, we can consider opening walls, removing partition between rooms, etc., to facilitate practical classes. If you do not have a large enough indoor space for this physical activity, so if you do not have a gymnasium or multi-purpose room, so we speak to the schools that are in our rural parts who are not as well endowed as others, we can consider repurposing other facilities to offer our lessons that can fit, give us the outcomes to fit within the confines of a smaller space by doing a number of things. We can do this by using medium risk. Use wet erase floor markers, floor tape, paint, and or chalk to visually identify spaces for physical distancing. Or we can use, in a high-risk environment, we use cones, mats, hula hoops, etc., to help to identify physical spacing. When using tangible items as visual representation, ladies and gentlemen, of space, such as a cone, what we call polyspot or mats, we must be sure to limit it to one student per item. And these items must be disinfected on a regular basis and between classes. Additionally, if we are using inside areas to conduct these physical education classes, because sometimes the weather will not allow us to be on the outside, we must ensure that the ventilation systems that we are using operate properly and therefore can increase the circulation of outdoor air as much as is possible by opening windows and or doors, using fans and other methods. We can use separate controlled entrance and exit points, utilize exterior entry and exit points separately for movement of students to their learning spaces, maintaining social distancing when moving students across your respective campuses or areas. Now, in addition to these code protocols, in order to deliver your lessons, especially for students who are not on campus, students who are getting remote classes. We can access the technology. Example, we can use their phones. We can use videos, etc., to have them access the activities that we are doing, because we can be the facilitators or other resource persons actually doing the activity, and the students will now be seeing the activity on their phones, then get that opportunity to mimic or to try that activity. Now, you might ask me the question, so they are not at college or they are not at school. What do you do? Now, we can give them projects, asking them to make the equipment that they will be using, taking us back a few years when we had our students, when we did not have enough equipment as we presently have. So we'd have asked our students to make their bats, to make their balls out of paper or other materials, to make their footballs out of stocking or socks, etc., etc., to be used in this class. Now, in another scenario in which we might have students on campus at your school, then you're able to also use that technology, use your digital projectors and display. You could even use a sound system, use your component system, a microphone, or and your other electronic devices to effectively communicate with classes that are impacted by increased social distancing. So your class is widely spread. You have a class of 30, and you're giving them that 6 feet, 6 feet, 6 feet spacing in front, beside, behind. So you can use this equipment, your sound equipment, in order to offer this instruction to your students. Now, as the class progresses, we have to clean and disinfect. If we are indoors, we have to clean and disinfect our floors with disposable floor mats, mops, etc. Now, on the field of play, ladies and gentlemen, there are certain elements that must be at the forefront for every teacher or instructor. The first one, social distancing, by using our cones, our saucers, or other marking equipment that we can use. There's also the element of change room protocols, which must be developed. How many students can be accommodated, and how storage of their clothes, their bags, etc. will be carried out. Next, attention to appearance to class, meaning how are these lines formed to attend class? How close are they? Do we have them in class as groups, small groups, or as large groups in a bigger space? The number of students per class commensurate with the available equipment that we have. How do we use the equipment with the number of students that we have? Safely use the equipment with the number of students that we have in our classes. We must ensure that we recommend one student per piece of equipment. Now, in a game such as football, you're having a football class and you might be doing your controlling and passing. That football, while doing that activity, the instructor must be vigilant in watching to see if students are taking this ball up with their hands, if students are showing any symptoms, sneezing, coughing, etc., and to take action in such a situation. Now, it is very important, ladies and gentlemen, that our sanitizing protocols during instructions are up to peak. We can never sanitize too much, even though some persons might say that these breaks will detract from the amount of time that is given for instructions. While instruction is important, the safety and well-being of our students must take precedence. Ladies and gentlemen, we must also, in this time of COVID-19, give regular breaks. Now, we must also concentrate on the proper use of equipment. We must look at the amount that is available and the care that we take with the use of these equipment. There are things that we must ensure that proper supervision is given to minimize contact between student with student and student with teacher. I move now to our classroom setting, and I will use the GC Foster model as the example. At GC Foster, there are many stations set up around the campus. That is hand washing stations, sanitization stations. Our classrooms, every room on our campus has a dispenser. So as you enter a room, there's a dispenser for sanitization of the students and the lecturers. Our classrooms have been marked, space marked, to ensure that social distancing protocols are fully and efficiently observed. There are markings on the desks, there are markings on the floor. In addition, lecturers and other persons will be given instructions as to which protocol is used for students to enter the classroom. We have also decided that in order to facilitate all our students in the scenario that all students are on campus, that our class groups will be divided into different groupings. So for instance, if there are 30 students in a particular class, that class will be divided into groups A and B. Group A for this week's sessions will be in class, face to face, while group B will get instruction via internet from their rooms or wherever they are. The following week, it will be reversed, in which group B will now be in front of the lecturer, while group A will now be given instructions via the platforms that we have available to us at the college. We are ensuring that no student of GC Foster is left behind, and we are certain that if other institutions use this protocol or these protocols that we intend to put in place and are putting in place, then we are sure that the instruction for physical education can be done successfully and safely. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Daly. Just a couple of questions for you, sir. You spoke about the level of supervision. The Ministry of Education protocol as it relates to class size is 25. Now, in a situation where you have a class of 25 students, given the fact that they have not been having physical education, some of our schools since the 22nd of March of this year, they might be a little excited, right? You might be attending to one group and the other students might be doing something maybe at the back of the line or elsewhere, despite your vigilance and your focus and your watchfulness. What do you think? Would you recommend that perhaps 25 is an ideal number? You concur with that number. Is it that we need additional supervision? Is it that the ministry also needs to give us more equipment?
I believe not only for physical education classes, but for any class at the primary, especially at the primary level, that additional supervision, monitoring has to be provided. Because as you rightly said, students having not seen their peers for quite some time now will be pretty excited, and therefore the touching, the hugging, etc. will be something that comes out of them naturally, that we will be wanting to do. We are suggesting that there be added supervision, whether we want to call it teacher assistant or whatever, but that is something that must, once we are re-entering the education system with our students, that the government will have to ensure that this level of supervision is provided.
Sir, you spoke about online classes and the novelty of getting the materials to them and delivering the classes by way of various platforms. But one of the research that came out recently pointed to the fact that 55% of our students are not in a position to access internet, right? How do we, given this fact, effectively reach those students, especially those students in deep rural Jamaica, like those in Balaclava and St. Speak to us about that.
Well, I will tell you, Mr. Lewin Williams, that Balaclava has good internet access. I can say that much. However, there are many other communities in Jamaica, which I know from my experience of going online since March and having classes, that they do have an issue with internet. There was an example given in Westmoreland by a principal who decided that he was going to take a ride on a bike and get the instruction to his students. I submit that we are going to have to take education and the delivery of education back a number of years, as I suggested previously, in which, if it means that we will have to mail instructional material to those students who cannot adequately access the internet in order to receive this instruction, then we will have to use such protocols. If it means radio broadcast in order for them to get it, we will have to use all of these devices to get education to our students. We will have to use and if it means going back to Telegram to get the message to our students, then we have to do that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Daly. In addition to that, though, we look at the bigger picture. At for example, the primary, the secondary level, below the fourth form level in the high schools, we tend to focus at the fifth form level on the CSEC program, because physical education is now a CSEC subject. This year, these results for CSEC are not yet out, where PE is concerned. Last year, I was speaking to Mr. Elton Johnson. He works at the Ministry of Education. He's the officer there for PE, the education officer for physical education. 97% was the pass rate last year for CSEC PE. In light of the COVID pandemic, how do you see physical education being affected in terms of the delivery at the CSEC level, the pass rate at the CSEC level, and even at the CAPE level?
The delivery, let me deal with the delivery first. The delivery that will have to be used will have to be similar to what we are using for other sectors of the education system for PE. However, in the examining aspect of this subject, that will have to be looked at. And this year, as a moderator, there were some schools who went out of their way to ensure that the practical aspect was done by putting in place some of the very protocols that I spoke to before. I went to a particular school and I observed that the principal, she ensured that every student that was to be examined had their own football. They also had their own saucers, etc. They also ensured that sanitization of the students was done very, very often. But what about the school who doesn't have the resource to do that? I believe that the examiners will have to look at how, and I would make a suggestion to say, instead of the examination of one school, one institution, be done on one day in one session, then we spread out the examination of these students. So I'll give an example. So let us say a school which has 30 students or upwards, that we make that protocol to say that no more than 10 students per day will be examined. And in that way, we're able to bring out the practical aspect of the examination by having just that number of students at the school on that particular day, and therefore we have a more efficient use of the equipment that is available, instead of having the entire cohort using the minimal amount of equipment that is available to ensure their safety.
Mr. Daly, final question, a question from the chat, from the question and answer section. One of our participants wanted to know, how do we guarantee, or how do we get that additional assistance in terms of supervision that you spoke of?
How do we
get that additional assistance in terms of supervision, that additional personnel for supervision that you spoke of?
You were a bit muffled. I was not hearing the question. Is the question on the chat?
Yes, the question is in the question and answer. A participant was asking,
yes,
how do we get that additional assistance that you spoke of in terms of supervision?
Okay. Well, the principals of the various institutions will have to make that representation. The teachers' union will have to make that representation to the government and show the government the exigency of having these additional persons in the school system. While I understand, because of COVID-19, there are the adequacy of funds is really not there. But then the nation's children, they have to be educated, and therefore we have to make that sacrifice to ensure that this additional personnel is placed in schools.
Thank you very much, Mr. Daly. Our next panelist is Mr. Marlon Gale. Mr. Gale is a lecturer at the GC Foster College of Physical Education and Sport. He is a specialist in field events. He is the head coach of the Mount Street-based St. Jago High School boys track and field team. During his tenure as a coach, he has been a part of many national teams, particularly at the junior level. One of our emerging long jumper, Sean D. Thompson, is a progeny of his. Mr. Gale will be speaking to us about the protocol here at GC Foster College and the protocol as it relates to our students, our fourth-year students who will be going on teaching practice for their practical. We now invite Mr. Gale to address us. Please.
Thank you very much for having me, Sir Williams, and good night to all panelists, all our listeners, all our physical education professionals, coaches, therapists, heads of institutions, and of course, viewers locally and abroad. Now, as we continue with the objective of sharing some practical solution, our practicum students will have a task at hand to achieve this time, because we will have to engage physical education in a new way, and of course we want to ensure that our students are prepared to deal with all the situations there, that they ensure that they are safe, and of course can give the best classes or the best service to their students as they make their last lap to graduation. So of course, in practical solution, what we want in our students is for them to develop a culture of consciousness among the different groups in which they interact, that they exercise caution, of course, where all stakeholders develop or display the appropriate psychosocial and socio-emotional qualities, which is paramount in this time in achieving the success we anticipate as we aim to create the most captivating environment where our practice teachers, our students, our sports professionals in COVID-19. In achieving this, we want to focus on three basic principles. The first principle is preparation, and that comes with a comprehensive orientation of our student teachers to ensure that the best practices are followed in the classroom and on the field. And most of that was discussed in the previous presentation. Also on the matter of safety, we want to ensure that all the guidelines are followed, especially though in the different areas of specialization. Also, execution, it entails using the most suitable methods to achieve goals, and of course ensuring that the necessary protocols are observed. So, what are they going to do in our orientation? Our orientation will ensure that our practice teachers are prepared as to how they manage their theory and practical classes. We are going to ensure that they are au fait with most of the conditions that they will face, so that they are much more prepared whenever they engage in the different schools. We also take in consideration that our students will be practicing at primary and at the secondary level. Also, the orientation will ensure that our practice teachers are clear on the importance of starting and ending their classes on time to facilitate the transition between class. Improve on their situation awareness in various public spaces, workplace, and classes. It is important that our students understand that the adhering to protocol, following the protocol, starts from home right to school and during the execution of their classes. Of course, they will have to be an agent which helps in the process, where the protocols that are set by each school, that they ensure that students will follow that. And they must also be ready to share concerns relating to any particular safety issue with us and of course their institution, to ensure that the best solution comes to the fore, where they can ensure the safety first of the teacher and of course all the students. They will also be asked to conduct a situation analysis, because this is very important. Each student will be going into a different environment. We assume that each environment would have everything ready, but we will also want to confirm that each school that they will be working, that the students, that the system that is put in place, is safe and of course conducive. So this will include observing implemented COVID-19 safety protocols. Of course, each student will be given a timetable, so you would observe the size of class, classroom, practical areas. We know that for many institutions, primary or high school, sometimes the students will have practical classes in the same space at the same time. And in adhering to social distance and all the necessary protocols for safety, we want to ensure that that is there, and if not, what would be the alternate solution. Also, the amount of equipment to determine methodology or the need for improvisation. In this, we know a lot of our practicum students would make different implements to assist in the teaching and learning process. We advise that, of course, most of these implements are somewhat plastic based, so that it is easier to sanitize, because when you would use from class to class, it gathers moisture, and of course that's a base through which the virus, for example, can stay for a longer period. Of course, also we want to include the movement from class to class, the designated area for students to store personal items or changing room, how to handle injury, illness, or emergency situation. So it's important that our students are fully in tune with all of these to ensure that whenever they start to work, start to teach, being a part of the staff, that they are au fait with all the things that they need to do, ensuring that, of course, they are staying safe and they are taking care of their students. Something else comes in play when the teacher is at the practice area with the student. They must have a change room safety protocol. The teacher is going to be there with the student, so the location where bags and personal items must be stored, that must be established. Our practice student must know that. How they are stored, whether they are going to be stored in separate bags, containers, locker, or own space. The number of students that are allowed in these change room in a timely manner, because remember, we have to take in consideration movement from class to class. So we want to ensure that the number of students that goes in, that whatever it is they have to do, that they do that in a timely manner. And we take in consideration also the size of the room and the ventilation. Many of our students who will be going on teaching practice will be traveling from home. Nonetheless, we are going to ensure that the same orientation, whether it is they are here or through the different communication mediums we have, they will join. We want to ensure that they are following those, but those specifically on campus, we'll be having a daily log of those students. And this will include their school, the room that they are in. Temperature checks will be done whenever they leave, and also when they return from their school. And of course, the final thing, upon returning, they must sanitize, change before they incorporate with anyone or anywhere at the institution. So, practical solutions in dealing with their classes. The basic protocols must be followed for all students in all situations. Teamwork. This is critical to the success of each class and delivering physical education. This comes with the practice teacher working in collaboration with the full-time teacher, or the team. A practice teacher can also team up with another teacher, because we spoke of the extra assistant. I think that is also a method that we can use to deliver successful classes. This will reduce class size, while improving individual attention. It is easier to monitor and manage students. More work will be achieved in a safer learning environment. Also, we limit the contacts and ensure maintenance of social distance during various activities. So where there is a limitation of implement, we want to ensure that our students are working in groups, but if they are working in groups, they are both sanitized. Say, for example, they're working in pairs, they are both sanitized. The implement in which they are interacting with is sanitized. What they will do, they will interact with that implement throughout that activity, not shared with anyone else. And after completing the activity, they will also be sanitized again along with the implement. Of course, you have to choose the most efficient methods to achieve your lessons objective. So we know students will be working in the primary and the high school. We want to encourage that by doing the situation analysis, whenever they see what the reality of their specific school is, they try their very best to come in with the ideas that will help to deliver safer and better classes. We also want to ensure that our students are helping in reminding the students right throughout their classes of the social distance, and also careful timetabling of classes is also critical for each teacher, the practice teacher, to prepare between classes, because one of the things that teachers would have to do even earlier now, area setup before the students come, because now they will have to take on to themselves the responsibility of ensuring that persons change safely, that persons are maintaining social distance and all of that. So timetabling is going to be critical. And of course, locations used for classes also is something that they would have to deal with during their time at teaching practice. So in finishing some of the practical solutions dealing with class, establish change areas or holding areas, strategic and well monitored water breaks. Protocols naturally will be repeated if the student has to leave the class, whether to go to the bathroom or wherever. Sanitization between class. This includes implements used during class, areas and surfaces used during class, and finally, absolutely no sharing during class, especially sharing water or anything else that students would be interacting with, just to ensure that we avoid any eventuality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So again, just a couple of questions.
Yes.
One of the questions that came from the question and answer section from one of our participants.
Yes.
She was wondering the importance of parents in the process, because you're talking about reintegrating these students in school, right? In terms of being involved in a physical education program. Notwithstanding, the parents are never really happy in having students at home because they know what happened where that is concerned. But what is the role? She wants to know the role of the parents in this reintegration process as it relates to a partnership between the school and the parent. What's the role of the parent?
The parent has a significant role to play between parent, institution, and the child. We understand that maybe in some cases, some of our teachers will have to teach by way of using the internet, the different applications they use to deliver classes to some of our students. So it has to be a tripartite relationship between the parent, the school, and the teacher, just to ensure that first, when the child leaves home, that all the necessaries are there, mask, sanitizer, all of those things. Reminders when they go to school, as soon as they are at school, or if anything should happen between school or anything, that parent needs to be made aware. And in the case where delivery of classes would be done, as I previously said, the parent, many of whom might be working from home also, would definitely have to team up to help each other achieve that goal. So the parent, in most cases, will play a more intimate role in their child's development.
Right. Thank you very much again. Another question that came from one of our viewers, one of our participants, rather. She wants to know what's the role, how is it that you're going to be able to facilitate, given the new normal, our students who perhaps are disabled. How is it that this online platform, how is it that the new physical distancing regulations, what kind of assistance, what kind of approach do we use? Is it the same? What kind of adjustment does the physical education teachers or department or the school as a whole will now need to make to facilitate those students?
Well, our physical education teachers have always been having classes on the field, on the courts, wherever it is they have classes. What they will have to do now is assist their students in developing that level of consciousness situation awareness, because the assumption is now, based on what was also published by the ministry, we have to assume that everyone has it. Without creating fear, we still can achieve our objective as physical education professional, and also create that environment where our students are safe and are also developing their skills based on whatever it is that is being taught.
Mr. Gay, speak to that specific approach as it relates to those students who perhaps have a disability.
Have?
Speak to that specific student who perhaps suffer from a disability. How will he or she be catered to?
Well, this is where the pairing sometimes of teachers will help, because we know the dynamics of classes sometimes might have persons who tends to learn faster, slower. If it is even a younger class, persons with disabilities also would definitely have to be incorporated carefully, but understand that they might not be able, based on their disability, to do all the activities. Because when you look at the primary school, we know one of the things that can be affected, we know that kids at that level, they learn while having fun. We have to ensure that by making the group smaller, that some amount of fun is there and they're learning, but there's the safety is of paramount throughout all the scenarios we could come up with. So our students with disabilities have to be cared for carefully, because we know that many of the high schools would have them. So we have to understand their limitation, and of course create that opportunity within our class where they can feel a part of it and also learning.
You spoke about delivering a safe environment. Now, we know that in a school situation, physical education is not the only subject. In a situation where students just completed an English class, right? They are supposed to move from, let us say, the grade 8 block down to the physical education department, to where the field is at the change room, given the situation. Now, in some schools, what would happen? The teacher would come and escort the class down to the relevant area. In some schools, as soon as class is finished, the students would just come down to PE, maybe arbitrarily, stop by the way, talk to a friend, play, whatever. Given the pandemic, given the new norm, what is it do you recommend? What is a safe way to have our students moving from English class, or any class for that matter, any academic class, down to the physical education department in a safe?
Okay. I mentioned previously the importance of timetabling. That is going to be critical between classes. Now, I would have to give two scenarios. First, if it is at the primary school, it is safer for the teacher to come for the students, because we understand that they are not that responsible and they tend to be distracted easily. What we would eliminate, however, when the teacher comes for that student, instead of holding hands or resting one on the shoulder, because we want to encourage the physical distancing, we would have to find a new form where they are walking without touching. And this is also where the teamwork comes in, where you would have another teacher assisting in the process, so that all the students can get far better attention. Also, you would have to take in consideration, based on the setup of each school, I know based on the protocols that have been implemented, students, you will see on some corridors where you're supposed to walk on one side or the other. I think for any school that might not have that, that is something that they can implement to ensure that everyone is not walking in a crowd in either direction. So you either walk on the left in a line or you walk on the right. For the high school, however, many of those students are far more responsible. I think it's a lot easier for those students because after a couple of weeks, I think they would have it a lot clearer. And I'm not saying that the teacher cannot go and meet the students, but it's a lot easier. And also, in doing that, you want to ensure that the students traverse from class to the changing area as quick as possible to ensure that time management also is adhered to so that you can impart the lesson and ensure that the students get back to class safe and ready to engage in the next activity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gale, for that very comprehensive response. Our next guest, ladies and gentlemen, is the rose among the thorns, and we are very happy to have her as a part of our panel this evening. She has a PhD from University of Leicester in sociology and legend. She has first degree and second degrees are done at the University of the West Indies. She's a voice of sports psychology in Jamaica and the region. She has done extensive work with the West Indies Cricket Board, Netball Jamaica, and a lot of athletes in our local scenario here in Jamaica and across the region. She worked with them as consultant sports psychology. She has done quite a bit of work designing courses for GC Foster College, University of Technology, UWI, and Excel Community College. She is the voice of reason. She has been on the prestigious Young One program in the year 2009, where she was interviewed. She has had many firsts. She is the first sports psychologist in our region from University of West Indies. And we want to invite her now, Dr. Olivia Rose. We want to welcome her, and she's going to be sharing with us her presentation. At this time when the COVID pandemic is raging, at this time when you're entering a phase of community spread, at this time we want to better understand what is it that goes to the mind of our children, what is it that goes to the mind of the parents, what is it that some of the behaviors that we might be seeing in the home environment where we are thinking that this child is doing, this child is unruly, which perhaps is not the case. And so we welcome her to enlighten us from that position, from where she is as a sports psychologist. Let us welcome Dr. Olivia.
Okay, thank you for having me. Good evening, everyone. I was trying to share my screen, but that's not working out. So I'll just go into my presentation. I had it initially entitled Lack of Physical Education, the Psychosocial Effects on Children. But before we go into that, I would like us to recall since the past few months, most families have been filled with plain simple games, some of which include who can run the fastest from one side of the room to the other, who can accurately recite the alphabet backwards, and hide and seek, Scrabble, and so many other games. The point is that the importance of games, especially physical activity, is still very important. And I don't want to say sports because we're not having sports anymore, but games and physical activity help in so many ways to cut out the chatter in the minds, to cut through the boredom, I'm sure, especially of being in lockdown and quarantine, and to help children to keep their awareness in this present moment and create a shared adventure. All right, so physical activity is important as it relates to youth development, and parents definitely play a large role in youth athletes' overall experience in sport. So they, in sense of the way they handle winning and losing, and how they keep youths interested in sport, and the life lessons are all important factors that help in dealing with young people. Now, with the advent of this pandemic a lot of that has been cut down. So what are the a lack of physical education and the psychosocial effects on children? I just want us to know that according to a May 2020 release from the UN, sports is a major contributor to economic and social development. Sports is a critical contributing factor in empowerment of women and young people, not just children, individuals and communities, health, education, and social inclusion. And of course, all of these would have been disrupted in some way, shape, or form due to the COVID-19. And I'm also going to elaborate a little bit on the social aspects of this disruption, especially from a sports perspective. So the global value of the sports industry is estimated to be at approximately 756 billion US dollars annually. And obviously the advent of the COVID-19, many jobs have been lost. Many persons right now are even wondering if it makes any sense to pursue careers in the field of sport, and several industries that are interconnected with sports would have been severely affected, such as travel, tourism, infrastructure, transportation, catering, and of course media broadcasting, to name a few. So the psychosocial impact of sports has been huge because sports, as we know, has critical benefits in terms of creating social cohesion, contributing to social and emotional excitement of fans. For many people, sports is a means of escape from harsh realities. And you would have seen that when there was the absence of football. I think one of the panelists was introduced as a particular fan for a club, right? So sports plays a very important psychosocial role in fostering communication and bridging gaps between communities and generations, in playing a central role in social transformation and the development of various social groups. So we know that sports definitely plays an important aspect in psychosocial development, even for children. So let us look at the significant issues that will have to be addressed now in order to ensure the safety of sporting events at all levels and the well-being of sporting organization. First, these will definitely include the adaptation of events to ensure the safety of athletes, fans, vendors, among others. And of course, various types of support now, and some new support that we would not be thinking of, especially financial and organizational, to encourage the continued participation in sport. So the global outbreak of the COVID-19 has resulted in the closure of various sporting facilities, such as gyms and parks, etc. And under such conditions, many, including children, tend to be one, less physically active, spend way more time on the screen, so there is longer screen time. They have, and that's through TV, playing games, etc. on a monitor, having irregular sleep patterns, as well as worse diet, especially if they're not monitored by their parents. And of course, most of these activities will result in weight gain and loss of physical activities, as well as diseases that have their roots in sedentary lifestyle. Particularly low-income families are especially vulnerable to negative effects of staying at home, especially since they usually are exposed to substandard accommodations and more confined spaces. So it's even more difficult for them to engage in physical activity. Even though that is the case, of course, the WHO recommends 150 minutes of moderate intensity and at least 75 minutes of vigorous intensity of physical activity per week. And of course, the benefits are numerous and have been proven to be very helpful, especially in times of anxiety, crisis. Now, the psychosocial impact of a lack of physical activity on children is very critical because a lack of exercise and physical activity can also have mental health impacts, such as the creation and maintenance of friendships, which are critical at this developmental stage during their lives. And if I were able to share the presentation, you would see a little boy by himself trying to play volleyball. So, you need each other, especially in competing and just learning a sport and socializing. But all of that now has been significantly impacted as a result of practical suggestions going forward. And what we have been doing is to engage in more online content tailored for children. And there are several free apps that parents can use as well. Free tutorials on social media to stretching, meditation, yoga, and dance classes, in which not only children can participate, but the entire. And there are also countless live fitness demonstrations available on social media platforms which do not require special equipment, and some feature everyday household that can be used instead of weights. And of course, because we're talking about children, these would have to be monitored. And another practical suggestion is that we have radio and television programs that activate people, as well as distribution of printed material that encourages physical activity, which are also crucial in bridging the digital divide for many households in various remote conditions or who don't have access to internet. Another practical suggestion is that sports associations, clubs, and organizations should be provided with proper guidance related to safety, health, labor, and other protocols that would apply to the future of sport events related to a safe working condition. Some of the other two panelists would have mentioned some of these already, one being definitely not sharing a water bottle. And you can imagine not hugging and touching and so on, especially if there is a victorious moment, which a natural reaction is to hug and cheer and touch each other. All right, but behaviors are learned, so we shall learn and administer these new modifications as we go along. Another practical solution is that there should be a collaborative effort among healthcare services and schools to support physical activity at home. And as much as possible, we're encouraging parents to supervise their children, monitor their children, and for themselves create a flexible but consistent daily routine, which includes some amount of physical exercise every day, because this has been proven to help with stress and the relentlessness and boredom that may happen. Another practical suggestion, we have various types of apps now. One that I wanted to introduce to you was the Clear to Play Compliance Management System, which is an app that keeps track of safety precautions and doing it right. However, the Clear to Play and its Clear number 2 Play relies on parents being honest about their children's health. And of course, you know how that would work, because these are some of the same people who may also be pushing their children to specialize in one sport all year round. So that again poses some challenges, but as we adapt and adjust, we will figure it out. Also, create physical education and sport committees through research and policy guidance, which would definitely support and ensure effective recovery and reorientation of physical education and sport. So, especially at the tertiary level, since we're talking at this level also, there should be scientific research and higher education, which are also critical to inform and orient future policies. Now, my closing question, and I know you are the ones who will ask me the question, but I want to pose this question to you. Will coaches need training in return to play guidelines? Of course, definitely the answer is yes. And one of the questions is, what will the demand look like from parents for COVID-19 safety guidelines and compliance, and for how long? Because you're going to be leaving your children in the care of the coaches, and what should these guidelines look like? Some coaches, unfortunately, are not trained, and therefore, how do we create a minimum coaching standard in terms of return to play? In closing, of course, sports education is a powerful means to foster physical fitness, especially critically for children, mental well-being, as well as social attitudes and behavior, while we are probably still locked down and can't move as we usually do. Physical activity and sport remain highly relevant, extremely relevant. In fact, to show its relevance, once we were locked down, the first area that was being planned in terms of how soon we can resume, one of these areas, as you know, was sport. And of course, in the many modules that are currently being developed, we need to ensure they comply with gender equality, non-discrimination, safety, and quality standards. And right now, winning in sports may not be, it may not just be about winning in sports right now or improving your rank or trying to get a trophy, but rather inventing new games that allow for new ways to boost your mood and enjoy the process of participating and growing. The world is changing, and we need to adjust and find new goals that can still keep children actively involved in the game. Thank you. I do have my references and a link, two links that you could see, but
Thank you very much, Dr. Rose. You mentioned something that I had in the back of my mind to speak to you about. In light of the COVID pandemic, we might not just be talking about a pandemic in terms of the COVID itself, but out of the COVID pandemic, we could perhaps see the emergence of a pandemic in obesity. I was speaking to a parent last night, and she was saying to me that she is the mother of two boys, and they are just putting on weight because they are not doing anything. They haven't been in school since late March. They don't go to play. They cannot play with the kids next door. They don't go to the football field anymore for obvious reasons. Right? Speak to us where that is concerned. And what are some of the social pressures, or what are some of the impact that that will bring on us in terms of us as a nation? We're talking about healthcare. We're talking about just keeping them healthy. We're talking about taking time out from the work. Speak to us about this.
well, thank you so much for that question. And of course, we definitely don't want to see an outbreak in obesity, especially among children. But in order for us to prevent that, we need to not only get children active, but ensure that they are being fed the correct food in the correct portions and getting the nutritional value, because some being at home without the ability to exercise, many children, unfortunately, due to harsh economic circumstances too, are not necessarily being fed the correct types of food. So that's one issue. But also, parents need to encourage their children, not just encourage them by telling them to get up and move from point A to point B, which, by the way, is also very effective. So if you see a child over a laptop or a computer or tablet, whatever it is, in front of the TV for more than 30 minutes sitting down, even to call them to bring you something, have them moving up and down, actually does help. But you want them to be engaged in at least 15 to 30 minutes of some form of active work. And you can also, as the parent, lead by example. If you have that time in between, because many parents, as was mentioned by one of the panelists, are also at home working and are unfortunately developing some sedentary lifestyle and just sitting in front of a computer. So, schedule a time for an activity that everybody can do together, and we call this the exercise time. And there is music and some form of movement. Those are some suggestions that readily come to mind, coupled with getting the experts, in especially the nutritionists and dietitians, on board in terms of the amount of food and types of food that you're feeding your children.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rose, for that response. It dawned on me, though, while you're speaking, and even now, that our lives will never be the same. We're talking about the loss of jobs, closure of business. We're talking about how it affects the family and the home, that spending power for the dollar. You go to the market and some of the prices that you're here now, they are ridiculous. It poses that challenge in that regard. Now, we are also talking about the inability of our students, our children at home, to socialize with their peers, and even the kid next door, right? Now, we know that play serves as a form of emotional release for that pent-up emotion for young people, and even for us as adults. We enjoy doing something that is fun for us, and then we feel much better after. In light of the fact that for such a long time they have been at home, what are some of the behaviors or behavioral changes that we could be seeing, that we might be interpreting for something else? You might say, the boy I facing, or why you don't get up? But it might not be that the child is rude, but it could be that there is no emotional release for that child, given the stress that he or she is coming under. Speak to us about that. What are some of the signs? What are some of the things that we should be looking for or could be visible in our children?
All right. So being in love, adjusting to this new situation, especially not being able to be as physically active, to have that release, that escape, as I spoke about earlier. Some of the things that you may see being exhibited amongst family members, not just children, can be irritability. You're spending extended periods of time all the time together. These are unprecedented times, so frustration might kick in. So, for example, on a regular situation, a spoon in the sink would not have irritated you, but it may just start to irritate you now, just because of the extended time that you're spending with each other. No, there are no quick fixes, and this is definitely not a sprint. So what I'm recommending is that we try as much as possible as family members to, one, understand our own coping mechanism and that we are different. And a very useful time, even though we're spending so much time together, is to request time out and for people to express what they want and their desires and be respectful in that. Because as much as we're spending so much time together, we also need some time physically apart, if that is possible. And when that is not possible, it is really about understanding how best can we use the space, because we can't assume that everybody has a big backyard or has access to even walking in their neighborhood and so on. So based on your own circumstance, as much as it is possible, try to engage in some form of physical activity and understand your own individual need and coping mechanisms. And as we all try to figure this thing out together, because there is no one solution that will work all the time.
Thank you very much for that response. We got a question from the chat. One parent wants to know what's a reasonable time for a child to be on the screen after they have done some work and perhaps some chores. What would you suggest, in your professional opinion, is a reasonable time for them to be engaged?
A reasonable time given the fact that there is almost little or nothing else to do, you see, I don't want to even put it in I don't want it to be, you have to think about your eyes as well, and your child's eyes just concentrated on a screen in front of you for more than 30 minutes. So, 30 minutes in interval, then fine. But again, maybe this is a reward. So if you are rewarding them and they're probably playing a game, it's going to take more than 30 minutes. So it's really going to be based on moderation and ensuring that their other senses are not being damaged, or you're putting yourself at risk, or they are putting themselves at risk. But 30 minutes with intervals is what I would recommend, especially in front of a screen.
Right. Dr. Rose, one question coming from the chat. One question I suspect is a coach. What do you say to a coach who is out of a job in the light of the COVID pandemic?
Oh, that one is a difficult one. First of all, the good thing about people who work in sports is that they're usually most times very resilient, but they still also need support, financial support and emotional support. And if you are out of a job now because of the devastating effect of the COVID-19 and your main profession is that of being a coach, my encouragement to you is to, one, remain hopeful, because it is only a matter of time before we figure out how to get back up and running, literally getting back out on the track, etc. Because, we use sports terms, so it's just a matter of time. But in the meantime, being negative does not help the process. And I'm not just here to say, oh, you're to just pretend like it's not happening. It's okay not to feel okay. That's the first thing. And to understand why it is that you're going through this. But to tap into the other skill sets that you have. Because if you're a coach, you are not just a coach, you are a teacher, you are a supporter, you help to nurture people's talents and so on. Also use this time to reinvent yourself. So, and to keep abreast with the latest technology and programs that are happening in the field of sport, so that when sport resumes in its full-fledged, that you are not in the back, or you're not lurking somewhere that cannot be found, but you would have upgraded, used the time to upgrade, and of course seek alternative source of income in the meantime.
Thank you very much for that response, Dr. Rose. You mentioned something earlier. You spoke about should there be a minimum standard for coaches? And by extension, I'm wondering, would that apply to our physical education practitioners? Do we need to revamp what we have been doing in light of the fact of what happens in different dispensations? For example, in the States, school has started. Children are back in school. And a lot of what we're doing here is quite different from what is being done there. Because I guess the situation varies as per culture and each individual state and country. And it's a function of resources. But in our situation, do we need to retrain our coaches? Do we need to develop a protocol with the Ministry of Education, with the Ministry of Sports, with the parents perhaps, with some important teachers of the ministry? Do we need to develop a protocol separate and apart from those recommended guidelines coming out of our experience and the best practices across the board?
Okay, I definitely say that's a resounding yes, simply because not to retrain fully, but there needs to be some amount of training at all levels as we welcome the reintroduction of sport and return to play. And that this should be inclusive of all the key stakeholders in the sports industry, from physical education in terms of theory and practice, coaches, parents, athletes, that is not just a generic model, but one that is also culturally relevant to us. And the challenges that we may foresee given how we are as a people and how best we can navigate these. So all stakeholders would be very much critical in this process. And this is where the retraining, I don't really want to say retraining, but that's the best word I can find now, would become important.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rose, for that response. But as our leading sports psychologist, not just in Jamaica, we are very proud of that. I like to say, in a manner of speaking, we don't want to beat our chest about that. What is your role though, in all of this, given that this is something that you do by nature of training? You would have had the experience working with various groups, with persons from different psychosocial backgrounds, with children, right across the social space, right, of our country and the region. What would be your advice to not just the government, but to parents and to us Jamaicans as a whole, and those of us joining us across the region, where this is concerned in terms of understanding the psychological dimensions in terms of what our children faces from the kindergarten level right up to the tertiary level, in light of the fact that for this term, this semester, there will be no sports. We're talking about men and women, youngsters who first will be looking for scholarship. We're talking about those who have been trained for football. We're talking about certain personalities that have been developed where youngsters see themselves that I am a footballer, I am a netballer. All of a sudden, that tag is being yanked from under your feet. You're no longer a footballer because there's no football being played. You're no longer a netballer, there's no netball being played. How does that affect the emotions? How does that affect the personality? How does that affect the development of that person at a time when they are going through stress and storm, when they are developing their own identity as a young person? Speak to that.
That's an excellent. Thank you so much for that. So, one part of sport is that it helps in the development and formation of identity. Now, when, as you had mentioned earlier, a child identifies as being a footballer or a track athlete or a netballer, and now there is no sport, that somewhat distorts their own perception of themselves, and they now have to be properly guided as to you are more than just an athlete. So I think we've unfortunately gotten it wrong in terms of attaching the sport that the child would participate in to their identity. But first, you are a human being with lots of possibilities, and you chose to specialize or develop your skill in a particular sport, and that means you're good at it, and you ascribe whatever attributes would come from playing that sport. However, you are more than just an athlete. You are a total individual who is capable of learning and developing all other types of skills that will enhance your overall development. But what I will also say is that we cannot deny the importance that sports help in shaping and forming identity, discipline, and certain character virtues. So sports play a critical role in all of that and becoming and developing of self. Now, that's why I'm saying, and I continue to remain hopeful that it will be only a matter of time that we return to play. And in the meantime, while we're in the warm-up area, we need to still be hopeful that sports, we will figure this out together because we are all in this together, and to remain positive. In remaining positive, I also want us to understand that not everybody copes in the same way. And because of that, some people will not be as positive and upbeat about what's happening. And we also need to respect and help them to cope and identify if there are cases that they are just not coping effectively, to refer them to professional help, because this is a very critical time and it tests every single mental fortitude or the lack thereof that you have as an individual, as a child, as a parent, as a coach, as anybody that works in the field. So at this time, it's extremely challenging, but even in extremely challenging times, there are great opportunities and circumstances that can really still make us victorious. There are many changes that people have also been transitioning from. You're transitioning from being the star person to nobody really being interested in you right now. You're transforming from probably somebody who was always active to not being as active as you used to. So there are lots of changes, and as many persons can easily adjust to working from home, really and truly athletes and people who work in sports don't really work from home. So that's a whole nother space and issues to navigate. Nonetheless, if you recognize that persons around you are not coping as effectively as they should, please ensure that you encourage them to seek professional help.
Thank you very much for that response, Dr. Rose. You mentioned earlier that we now have to re-educate our children not to hug, right, the social distance. So in a context where they greet each other, or even at play, and they perhaps score a goal or a point or something, you have to keep reminding them as practitioners of physical education, social distancing. But it goes quite contrary to what we're seeing on the screen. You look at the big screen and you're looking at football, you're looking at cricket, and you are looking at basketball. And you're seeing these iconic persons who they look up to, including some of us who have our different teams and different characters and players that we support and we brag about. How do you now say to them in terms of what they're seeing and what you're telling them to do? Because oftentimes children tend to model what they are seeing. You may say X to them, but you might do Y. And that's why we often say in Jamaica, practice what you teach. How do we now get them to understand that although you're seeing this in light of the COVID pandemic, it is dangerous?
Well, again, it takes some amount of time, and it's a behavior modification that will take time, but which will be implemented suddenly. Because it was suddenly that we started to frequently wash our hands, and it was suddenly that we now had to be separated from people in terms of communicating with them and so on. So you're gonna make some mistakes, at least initially, but over time, once you continue to model the behavior and to encourage them to remember to do what they're instructed, remember to stay apart from Mary, remember to stay apart from John. And it's a little bit, just saying it to you now and giving the instructions seem a little bit mechanical, but over time, once you model the behaviors, then they will take effect and become a little bit more natural.
Okay, thank you very much for that response, Dr. Rose. We know that boys and girls, their behavior, the things that they do, are perhaps different in terms of culture, in terms of norms, in terms of tradition, and of course, by the way in which they are socialized. Now, given they're in a similar situation, since the COVID pandemic would have had most of us at home, mean in terms of children, how does this play out? Do they respond the same way? Do they react the same way? Are we going to see similar kind of behaviors coming from the boys as it relates to the girls? Is it going to be the same, or is it going to be different, given you're talking about two different sexes at that tender age group when perhaps the personalities and the characters are not yet fully developed?
Well, it's hard to say if it's going to be different or the same, because children are really like a blank slate, and children, one, participate mostly in participate in sport mostly for fun. So it's gonna be based on how much emphasis is relayed to or said to the girl to go and do something else if she decides to play, versus the boy being allowed to freely roam around the house and do whatever it is. So it's really based on, you may see some similarities, you may see some differences, but it's primarily based on how they are being socialized by their primary caregiver.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Rose, for this segment and for sharing with us your knowledge and your
Thank you for having me.
expertise. All right. And the understand that we might need to refer to you given the questions that are coming in. At this point in time, we want to invite Mr. Marlon Gale to just give us a brief presentation as it relates to sports. What is it that is going to be done now in terms of the safety protocols? A number of schools still have training going on. Some of the clubs, for example, I know that Harborview training is going on there. I know that recently before the summer ended, there was a camp in Manchester where SDC, they had a very, very successful 2-week camp there. Lots of games and children from that area was engaged in that. Speak to us about the safe practices as it relates to the COVID pandemic, where training is concerned in our schools and our clubs.
Okay, thank you very much. So, as we continue our practical solution, we speak specifically of the sports now that are practiced at the different levels. And I just want to say that after the previous presentation and the question and answer, I'm sure I will have an easier task moving forward, because much of what was discussed relates a lot to these solutions and how we move forward in the different sports. So, but we still want to continue on the same principle: preparation, safety, and execution. And of course, in this case, the coach or instructor must ensure that they whatever plan they have suits the condition, and also the ultimate athletic development that is the focus in terms of developing. Safety comes with following the guidelines. We have to keep repeating that. And of course, execution entails using the most suitable methods, depending on the sport, the environment you're working with, to achieve those methods to achieve your goals, and always bearing in mind the safety measures. Now, the most common sports that we practice now falls under the category of either being low risk, medium, or high risk. At GC Foster, track and field, first and foremost, because of the categories, is a low risk sport. But when it comes down to volleyball and cricket, that's medium. Basketball, football, and netball now becomes high risk sport, because it requires a lot more contact between the implement used, between the players, between staff that would for example, be handing water or anything else during, and the therapist providing assistance in different game situations. So this becomes more important in the sense you have to have a staff that is fully cognizant of what responsibilities they have at the start of it, before training, during and after training. Of course, we have to talk also about the preparation of our coaches who go on coaching practice, and our sports massage therapist who works with different teams. In a time like this, when we have COVID-19, we have to ensure that all protocols are clear and are adhered to, that our professionals understand how to protect themselves in different situations, so that we can have the best of both worlds, the success in whatever results you aspire and also safety. So, in preparing for session, the coach must ensure that he is fully cognizant with the activities he is about to execute and that they are within the guidelines provided in a practical sense. Meeting with coaching staff and support staff will help make the process a lot safer and more efficient. Also, the therapist, which is a critical part of it, must ensure that he has sufficient resources to last the session, which includes all his protective gear, all the different equipment that he would use, whether it's the different apparatus used in massage or a massage gun, or if it is that he's going to give active release by using his fingers, or we call it doing acupuncture with the fingers. He has to understand that sanitization goes before, after. He has to be at a location where it is void of traffic. He has to ensure that attending to each of his athletes and our clients, it has to be as such that he is fully okay with what the issue is. If the individual needs to be treated at that time. Also, all equipment must be sanitized prior to training session. Entering the training location, this goes for all sport, coaches and staff. We must lead by example, must be wearing their mask. All athletes must be wearing their mask except when engaging in training activities. Temperature checks must be done upon entrance. And we have to be honest with ourselves, because remember, we are trying to ensure, whether it's primary, high school, or the elite level, we have to develop that culture of consciousness and honesty. And we have to be vigilant in ensuring that if someone shows this, any sign relating to COVID, the necessary questions must be asked. That person must be isolated. We know there are persons who have different issues, but we have to ensure we make it clear before they incorporate themselves with the group. Of course, a nurse plays a critical role, or a first aider plays a critical role in this instance, because we know many of the institutions might not have a nurse. So we have to use the next best thing, ensuring that those protocols are observed. Next thing, everyone must have their own sanitizer, despite it being provided at the location. And of course, in our situation at GC Foster, we have various hand washing stations in the location of many of these areas, or at the entrance of some of these areas. A towel is appropriate. An athlete in this tropical condition is going to sweat. So they're going to need all of those things. They must provide their own water and hydration. And at all levels, whether primary, high school, or the club level, the athletes, must ensure that these things are personal. Now, during training session, the therapist must ensure that all protocols are followed when working with each athlete. And we spoke specifically to the process. Necessary documentation must be made as it relates to what attention the athlete needed, what was applied, and also to ensure that the area you keep sanitizing right throughout the session as you deal with each individual. All personal belongings must be kept together in their own space or container, and also at a distance. And sanitizer must be used as frequent as necessary, taking in consideration the sport that you are engaging in. Some sport might need a higher level of sanitization based on the activities that they are doing. especially for the group sport, the football, the netball, the volleyball, and so forth, you're going to need a lot more sanitization there whenever you're doing the different activities. Of course, activities must guarantee safety despite their importance in the athlete's development. In some instances, based on what you're doing, group size must be reduced to ensure the safe distance protocol right throughout the session. It's not something that you start with and then you lapse in the middle of the session. You want to ensure that that is adhered to right throughout. Work in small group. So a perfect example, if we are doing volleyball and we are doing spiking, you're working with a pair of players, you want to ensure that they are interacting with the same implement right through. Sanitize before and after to ensure that they're okay. Next, giving an example, in track and field, we have 8 lanes. Instead of having all 8 lanes occupied, we can use 4. And we have seen this in many of the meets, so we have to ensure that we follow the best practices to ensure that everyone is safe. In group sports, there's a tendency when you are there on the field that individuals might spit in a particular area. We recommend that none of that happen because in Italy, yes, sir.
Let me just interject here. Speak to a person in the chat. Speak to the student. As he's coming to training, there's an igloo there. There's a need for water to drink. How do you go about that? Previous to COVID, it would have been okay for that person to go over to the igloo, pull his arm up, and then to continue on their merry way. No, it is different. We're operating at a different time. Speak to that first.
Well, and and the fact that we are operating in a different time, that's the reason why I recommended for all levels that you provide your own hydration. However,
where it runs out, Mr. Gale, where it runs out, you provide your hydration, it is finished. What do we do?
So in a case as such, we can have one member of staff wearing the necessary protective gear during the distribution. It cannot be a case where every athlete comes with his own container and the touching. That is where we put ourselves in a serious situation. So we can have one person doing the distribution and ensuring the necessary sanitization takes place.
Right. You're talking about training and sports. With coming up shortly, Jamaica will be looking to qualify for the next World Cup. We're talking about 25 players being in camp for training, right? How do we have 25 persons in a training situation, for example, at the gym? What kind of approach would you recommend for training where that is concerned to get the best value for training in doing some physical preparation, background work, so to speak?
Well, I'm sure for football at that level, they would have their protocol. But one of the things I'm sure that they would do is, as we have been recommended, that they work in smaller groups. So you would not have the whole team working in the gym at the same time. Because one of the things that would have to be monitored throughout the gym activity is that sanitization has to be done before and after using each equipment. We have to ensure also that all personal belongings for these individuals in and out, they are stored in a safe area, and ensure that whenever they leave with all of those. So splitting them in small groups would definitely help, and of course prevent any possibility of contracting the disease. What we realize based on most of the report, a lot of the celebratory activities, whether during training, whether during competition and so forth, those are the moments when you are more likely to get infected.
Okay, thank you very much for that response, Mr. Gale. Now, in addition to that, for example, implements like the shot put, the javelin, the discus, that's one of your area of specialization. Speak to us about athletes where training is concerned with the use of those implements, especially where they are in short supply?
Well, what is done at GC Foster, each athlete, whenever they are going out to train, normally takes their own implement. So if they are going to do if they are going to work on their shot put technique, they would take 1 or 2 shots. They are the only ones that we would be working with that group. The same thing happens for discus and javelin. Even before COVID, most of the athletes would not really share implements. Only in a few occasions it might happen whenever we have more persons, but whenever we have a control number, it in most occasions they're always working with 1 or 2 implement alone right through their session. But in the event, no COVID is here, we want to ensure that they don't take it for granted, despite the fact they were doing it before. So they would need to ensure that that is done. Yeah.
Right. Speak to us as it relates to a student or an athlete, a student athlete who is asthmatic and aware of the mask. What does he or she do as it relates to the wearing of the mask where training is concerned? This person is asthmatic.
If the person is asthmatic,
yes,
and wearing a mask,
yes.
Well,
it's a requirement for the mask to be worn.
Right.
But this person is asthmatic.
But remember, when the individual is engaging in training, that individual doesn't necessarily need to wear a mask. And in a case where you are working with a group, simple solution, some form of isolation will take place to ensure that that individual is always at a safe distance, fulfilling their training obligation.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Gale, for your response in that segment. We want to invite Dr. Olivia Rose back to speak to us here. A couple of questions that we'd like her to respond to. Now, it's also important to acknowledge that the questions that you're asking are very, very important, that they are your concerns, and we are seeking to address them as best as possible. The question for Dr. Rose, thank you very much, Mr. Gale. The question for Dr. Rose, there seems to be quite a bit of fear setting in the school environment among teachers, among parents, among students. Speak to that. How is it do we calm the fears, given the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and the reality of it, given what is happening now in terms of the community spread?
Okay, thank you, John. I actually was trying to respond to some of them in the chat, but I'm happy that I got the opportunity to answer here as well. The thing is, the fears are going to be real as you make them, especially when you are seeing the high number of cases. However, I think that there are some things that are just not within your control, and there are some things that are also within your control. Your state of mind and what you think and how you think and for how long you choose to think a particular way, those are within your control. Now, when you surround yourself with people who are negative or very fearful, and as I mentioned earlier, we all don't cope in the same way. So you have some people who are extreme warriors, some people who are over researchers, some people who can tell you all the latest that's happening, and some people who really don't want to know anything more than what has been supplied to them. So dealing with fears, especially if you feed the fears, they will intensify, and this is not a one-off quick fix situation. So if the fears are surmounting and it's becoming extremely difficult for you as the teacher or as the coach to function effectively, then you too need to seek some amount of emotional and psychological support to help you to be able to cope with what's happening. And this is one of the most important times that I need to also say that seeking help does not mean you are weak or incapable. It simply means that you have identified an area where you need additional help so that you are able to function effectively, especially to serve the children and those athletes who will be in your care.
Thank you very much for that response, Dr. Rose. There's a concern as it relates to the psychosocial environment that needs to be created to quell those fears and to have our children in an environment where they can learn. Because it's all well and good, school can be open, they are at school, but that environment that assures them, that keeps them calm, that ensure that their minds are in the right place, because they could be sitting there and their minds are elsewhere. Right? Speak to that. Speak to the role of a guidance counselor in this process.
Before I even go to the role of the guidance counselor, I more want to address the role of the teacher, because the teacher is the one that is going to be with students most of the times. And the teacher in this role becomes like a coach. If you are a coach and you look worried and you seem anxious, even when you have prepared your team to the best of your ability, they will feed off that energy. So it is really important, extremely important, that as the teacher, you identify how you are feeling, why you are feeling this way, do your own emotional checks and be true and honest with those. And there are various techniques and ways in which you can, treatment processes that can help you to reduce anxiety and fear if they heighten out of control. And this is where, again, the role of a trained professional becomes very effective. And a guidance counselor would be one of those persons as well. I hope I got that last part in.
Thank you very much. Dr. Rose, in a minute, speak to us in terms of what is happening now, in terms of our school, in terms of our fear, because the fear factor is real, in terms of the safe protocols, in terms of the state of mind of one, the student, two, the parent, three, the teachers, the physical education practitioners, and Jamaica as a whole. What's the way forward in terms of where headspace is at this moment? What is it that we need to do?
First of all, I'm not sure if we have the physical resources, because as I was mentioning earlier in the chat, that a coach has an entire field to monitor a smaller number of people than, say, for instance, a teacher in a class with different age groups of children who are going to be extremely happy, at least on day one and day two, for seeing their friends in such a long time, and so on. So many things are at play now. So to tell you an answer or to suggest an answer in this forum is not within my league to do, not because I don't know the answers, but this is going to definitely, at least initially, be some amount of trial and error, okay, until we all get it right. There have been schools in other countries that have been reopened and have closed since. There have also been schools that have reopened and remain open. So it is really about how we try to get the best model and tailor it to suit our circumstance and our reality. So it is a whole host of different emotions and anxieties that people are dealing with now at multiple levels, and different groups of people have different types of fears and concerns, which is why we need more emotional help and support for the different categories of people, because we also assume that children are okay because they don't know what's going on, but they feed off your energy as adults. Also, they are going through, and there may be heightened cases of child depression because they are not being able to socialize as they used to. Adults and the teachers and coaches are experiencing different concerns of fear and so on, especially those in high risk categories. And so there are many factors at play, which again will require us, at least initially, doing some form of trial and error, being patient with the process, being hopeful, having positive energy as much as possible, and to know that we're all in this together, and use and customize the best practices that work elsewhere and see how best they can suit our own situation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rose. It has been enlightening, it has been informative, and of course, you have helped to quell some of the fears and answer some of the questions and to bring a broad and specific perspective to what is it that goes through the mind of our children, the parents, what are some of the things, some of the impact of sports and no sports, what is it that the sports industry means globally and our role in that. And we look forward to sharing with you and working with you at a time to come as this. We journey together to find solutions, practical solutions during this time when the pandemic is on. I want to invite Mr. Michael Daly just to respond to one question and to give his closing remarks. There was a question where in his presentation we mentioned, Mr. Daly mentioned the assistance that is needed. One of the questions in the chat, there was a concern, who would the assistance come from? And who is it would be the person who is going to be paid for that assistance at a time when work is of paramount importance and earning is of paramount.
Your mic went a bit, Mr. Williams, so I did not really hear the ending part of your question. So if you could repeat part of the question.
There was a question asking who is going to pay. You suggested in your presentation the need for assistance, right? There was a question asking who would pay for the assistance because nobody is working for free. And what kind of person should we target for the assistance? Should it be persons who are untrained, or persons who are trained who are not working, persons who are just out of high school, out of university? Would it be volunteerism? Where would the assistance come from, and who would possibly pay for the assistance? And then your closing comments.
Well, as I listened intently to Dr. Rose's presentation, I recognize that she spoke about retraining and training. We have to understand that, as I said previously, that these are not normal times, and therefore some of the things that we took for granted as little as 9 months ago, those are things that we now have to throw out the windows. When I mentioned the assistant to the teacher, to the PE teacher, I was actually speaking about the timetabling of other persons, other teachers who could give this sort of assistance. Now, the training will have to be given to these persons. As we know, all teachers will have to now get training as it relates to COVID-19 and those protocols. But the ministry, regardless of what will happen, unless we are going to say there will be no school anymore, there will be no education, which we cannot do, we'll have to somehow find the funds to take up the mantle and to have these persons in the education system. There is no other way about it, because the situation which we have, and I have been to many schools where I have seen one teacher with 40 odd students, when we know that the stipulated number is 25 pupils to a teacher. And therefore, because of the exigency of the situation, government will definitely have to find the funds, or have dialogue with the school, re-timetabling, so that each class that goes to these activities can have 2 teachers assisting.
All right, final question, Mr. Daly. As sports such as swimming, how do we navigate swimming at this time? Schools like Immaculate, St. Andrew High School, and St. Hugh's, they have active swimming programs. A number of the students and young people in Kingston, and adults too, are involved in different swimming clubs. And even here at GC Foster College, swimming is an integral part of the curriculum. How do we navigate swimming at this time in light of the COVID pandemic?
Well, I saw somebody ask what are some of the safe sports that can be done in these COVID times. And when I mentioned a number of activities that could take place, I left out swimming. Swimming is one of the safer activities that can be done. We need, those of us who understand the environment of swimming will understand that the water that we are swimming in is highly treated. And there are a number of chemicals that has been recommended by World Health Organization and other organizations involved in the sport of swimming that can be used in a pool, for example, or tubs or whatever the person is in. What they don't recommend, however, is that things like noodles, kickboards, figure eights, those be eliminated, or each person that is swimming have their own equipment to use. They do not recommend the sharing of these swimming equipment, but they do say that swimming is a safe sport to do once the protocols of sanitization and chlorination and other chemicals that are used in the pool are present. Then swimming is quite safe. Only take away the implements from the swimmers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Daly. And ladies and gentlemen, our participants, our stakeholders, our partners, those who join us online, those who join us through the link, those who join us on YouTube, I want to thank you for participating in this, our first webinar here at GC Foster College at a time when the COVID-19 pandemic is rearing. It was our pleasure to bring you this webinar to help you to find safe solutions in the new normal, practical solutions. We thank you for joining with us this evening. And as we go forward, working together as a team, as one nation under God, we pray that we continue to remain safe, follow the safety protocols. A number of things were suggested. We hear about social distancing, not for the first time, the use of masks. We spoke about moving from point A to point B, from English class, from the block down to the field. We talk about the use of the change room, the safe spaces, the storing of the equipment, and adequate supervision or additional supervision being needed while changing is taking place. We talk about allowing the students, perhaps giving them projects in which they can do and upload videos. We talk about the use of social media and online platforms to deliver content and videos. We talk about the possibility of dropping off material to students in remote areas. We talk about tailoring your situation based on your resources and based on your school where you are. We look at some of the safe sports, for example, swimming, and would have thought that swimming is a safe sport, given the chlorination in the water. We talk about the impact, the psychological impact of the COVID pandemic. We talk about the fears being faced by the parents, by the students, by the teachers themselves, who perhaps have to put on a brave face to face the students who they teach and who they try to educate and try to keep calm. And they themselves, I wasn't even thinking of that they perhaps need to be counseled in terms of their own fears. We talk about moving forward and looking at best practices as it relates to what happens across the globe. We talk about GC Foster College own protocols here at the college. We talk about the protocol for the fourth year students, they being sanitized, they doing a situation analysis when they go out to the different schools. They need additional support from the teachers at the school. There was a time when a practice teacher would go to a school and they would be given the full timetable of that teacher at the school. In light of the COVID pandemic, that is a no-no right now. We need to have adequate supervision. We talk about the Ministry of Education, guideline Ministry of Health, where the class sizes should be no more than 25. We talk about sanitization stations being placed at the classrooms across the campus. We talk about signs being placed to remind our students. We talk about the total reculturalization of our students. We also mention saying to the students, no hugging and no celebrating in light of what we're seeing on the screens. And so we hope that somewhere along the line, your questions would have been answered. Some of these things have resonated with you. And going back to your schools, you will feel more empowered. You would have had some additional information that's going to help you to navigate the times that await us in educating our children. We talk about the impact also on the physical education program at the C-sector level. From all of us here at GC Foster College, we thank you for joining us in this practical solution, the new norm, first webinar across what could be a series as we seek to address and to find solutions at this time as the COVID pandemic rages and we find answers to deliver our physical education classes to our students. Thank you very much for joining us. And we pray that above all things that you will prosper even as your soul prospers. Thank you.